Ryan Carter hadn't meant to end up sleeping in the back of his van, but life doesn't always give you a warning before it collapses. One month, he was working full-time at a pet grooming shop in Columbus, Ohio, earning enough to pay rent on a tiny one-bedroom apartment and keep his rescue dog, Buddy, fed. The next, COVID hit. Layoffs rolled in, and within weeks, he was jobless, then evicted. Now he was parked in the back corner of a Walmart parking lot, in a white Ford Transit with a busted heater and a half-empty bottle of water. It was January, the kind of cold that made everything ache. Buddy lay curled up beside him, his ribs visible through fur that had once been thick and clean. Ryan pulled an old hoodie over both of them and tried to ignore the sound of the wind pushing against the van walls like it wanted in. Outside, the fluorescent lights cast a ghostly yellow across the asphalt. Inside, it smelled faintly of dog shampoo and cheap takeout from 3 nights ago. Ryan hadn't eaten a full meal in almost a day. He was down to $76 in his checking account and no idea what came next. He had already applied to dozens of jobs, fast food, warehouse, cleaning. Nothing stuck. Either he was overqualified or underexperienced. Some said he was too old. He was 34. Buddy shifted, resting his head on Ryan's chest. That weight-warm trusting was the only thing holding him together. He stared at the cracked ceiling of the van, blinking back the tightness in his throat. He used to have plans, a 5-year track, save up, open his own grooming shop one day. Nothing fancy. Just something clean, honest, his. But dreams didn't survive pandemics, apparently. Not when you were alone. Not when you had nothing left to leverage. He reached for his phone, the screen flickering at 8% battery, no signal. Just enough juice for one quick Google search before sleep, if you could call it that. How to start over with nothing. It was the kind of search people did when they'd run out of options. Not hope, because hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. The top result was a blog about a guy who started a shoe cleaning business with just a rag and some polish. That didn't apply to him, but something about the spirit of it stuck. He kept scrolling. Then he saw it. An article titled, "You don't need money. You need a problem worth solving." He clicked. The page was slow to load, but when it did, it opened with a quote from a book Ryan had never heard of, The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. The quote read, "The only way to win is to learn faster than anyone else." He didn't understand all of it, not yet, but that line landed hard. He looked at Buddy, at his own cracked hands, at the empty space around him. He had no money, no home, no connections. But he did have one thing. He knew how to make dogs feel better. He knew how to wash, brush, soothe, and care. He had done it every day for years. People liked his work. Dogs loved him. He closed his eyes, the phone dimming in his lap, battery ticking down to 3%. That night, Ryan didn't sleep much. Not because of the cold or the ache in his back, but because of the thought gnawing at his brain. What if the thing that got him out of this wasn't a lucky break or a handout, but a skill he already had, used differently? He didn't know how yet. He didn't have a business plan or investors or even a clean pair of jeans. But maybe, just maybe, he could start with what he did have: a van, a dog, a borrowed towel, and a willingness to try. And in that moment, as Buddy let out a soft, contented sigh, and the first snowflakes of the night began tapping gently on the windshield, Ryan Carter made a quiet promise to himself. If the world wasn't going to give him a second chance, he'd build one himself. The next morning, Ryan woke up to the sound of a shopping cart slamming against a metal pole. He sat up, breath fogging in the cold, and rubbed his eyes. Buddy was already up, wagging his tail like it was just another beautiful day. That was the thing about dogs. They didn't care how bad things were. They just needed you to show up. Ryan reached for the glove box and pulled out a folded-up flyer he'd printed at the library a few weeks earlier. Mobile dog grooming. Affordable, gentle, reliable. It read, in bold black letters. At the time, he'd printed 10 copies, then stuffed them away. He didn't think anyone would take him seriously. He didn't even have a proper business name. But now, looking at the flyer, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like something, a seed. He walked into a nearby neighborhood and started taping flyers to mailboxes. Then, feeling bolder, maybe just desperate, he knocked on a door. A woman in her 50s answered, squinting at him from behind the screen. "Hi," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm starting a mobile dog grooming service. I don't have a salon or anything, but I've got all my own tools and experience. I used to work at Pet Haven off Main Street before it closed down. I'll do the first grooming free, just for a review." She raised an eyebrow. "You're doing it from your van?" He nodded. "I clean everything after every session. Gloves, sanitized equipment, safe shampoos. I love animals. I can give your dog a gentle wash, nail trim, ear cleaning. No pressure, just thought I'd offer." There was a pause. Then she said, "My Schnauzer does need a wash. She smells like bad cheese." 10 minutes later, Ryan was in her driveway, brushing out a matted, grumpy dog named Bella. He laid down a clean tarp, set up his table, and went to work like he had so many times before. As his hands moved, something inside him settled. His body knew this routine better than it knew sleep at this point. Water, lather, rinse, towel dry. Talk softly. Let the dog feel safe. Bella didn't bite. She actually leaned into him during the rinse. When he finished, the woman handed him a $5 bill, even though he told her it was free. "For the effort," she said. "And honestly, you're good." That night, Ryan parked in a different lot, a little closer to town. He checked his email on borrowed Wi-Fi. Nothing. But then, the next day, the woman from before had posted about him on a local neighborhood Facebook group. Just one sentence. "A guy named Ryan is grooming dogs out of his van. Sounds sketchy, but he's actually really good." By noon, he had 4 messages. The first 3 appointments paid nothing, just like the first. He needed testimonials, word of mouth, and trust. The 4th woman insisted on paying $20. Said her pug hadn't looked that clean in years. And she told 2 of her friends. By the end of that week, Ryan had washed 10 dogs. It wasn't glamorous. He used jugs of water warmed from the sun, borrowed power from hardware stores when they let him plug in, and cleaned up in gas station bathrooms. But every time he brushed a dog's coat or clipped a nail just right, he felt something come back: dignity, confidence, the smallest flicker of momentum. Each day brought a new challenge: a stubborn husky, a broken clipper, a sudden downpour that forced him to towel dry everything by hand. But he kept showing up, kept knocking, kept earning trust, one pet at a time. He started keeping a notebook, a spiral-bound one he'd found under the seatware. He jotted down every detail. What shampoo worked best on curly coats? Which neighborhoods tipped well? Which dog owners had 3 pets and might call back? It wasn't a business plan, but it was something better. It was real data. By the end of the month, Ryan had made just under $400. It wasn't much, not yet, but it was the first money he had earned in months, doing something that felt like his. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building. And deep down, even if he couldn't see how far it would go, Ryan Carter knew one thing for sure. He had found his way back to usefulness, and maybe, if he played it right, to something bigger. A few weeks into the new routine, Ryan stopped by a used bookstore on the edge of town. He wasn't there to buy anything, just to warm up and kill an hour before his next appointment. The place smelled like old wood, stale coffee, and sun-faded paper. It was quiet, except for the soft creak of floorboards and the hum of a small heater behind the counter. He wandered toward the self-help section, not really looking for anything in particular. Most titles seemed too flashy or too abstract. Manifest your dreams! Get rich in 90 days! They didn't speak to someone whose current dream was just a warm shower and 3 clients in one day. But then his eyes landed on a small paperback, its edges curled and spine cracked. The title was simple: The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. It didn't promise magic. It promised something else, something Ryan hadn't felt in a long time. Structure. He flipped it open and read a highlighted line on the first page. The only way to win is to learn faster than anyone else. That stopped him. He'd been hustling hard, sure. Scrubbing dogs in driveways, knocking on doors, writing notes in his spiral notebook like his life depended on it, which, in a way, it did. But learning, real, intentional learning, that was different. He bought the book for $1.35, paid in crumpled bills and coins, and sat in his van reading until the sun dipped behind the strip mall. That night, under the dome light of the Ford, Ryan devoured the first 4 chapters like they were food. The book didn't talk about raising capital or finding the perfect brand. It talked about starting small, testing ideas, and letting the customer teach you what works. Build, measure, learn. MVP, minimum viable product. Validated learning. It didn't sound fancy. It sounded like exactly what he was doing. Except now, it had a name. A method. Ryan stayed up past midnight, rereading one paragraph over and over again. The MVP is that version of a new product which allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least effort. In other words, don't guess test. The next morning, he looked at his business differently. What he had wasn't just a hustle. It was a prototype, a living experiment, and that meant he could treat it like a startup. His first move: package his service more clearly. Instead of offering anything and everything, he created one basic service: the gentle groom. It included a wash, nail trim, ear clean, and coat brushing. $29 flat. Simple, quick, repeatable. He pitched it as a stress-free grooming experience, right in your driveway. His second move: feedback. He printed out tiny feedback cards, just 4 questions. Was your pet calmer than usual? Was the process clean and efficient? Was the price fair? Would you recommend me? He offered a 5% discount on the next appointment for anyone who filled it out. His third move: a small rebrand. Nothing fancy, just a name. Buddy Wash inspired by the only creature who'd stuck by him through everything. Word spread, faster than he expected. Customers liked the simplicity. They liked that Ryan remembered their dog's name, their preferences, even which ones hated the blow dryer. And thanks to the cards, he was learning what they really valued: convenience, trust, and gentle handling. With every appointment, he wasn't just grooming a dog, he was gathering data. Which times of day got more bookings? Which neighborhoods brought in the best referrals? Which shampoo brands got compliments? He stopped trying to sell and started asking smarter questions. If someone canceled, he politely followed up. Was the timing off? Or was there something I could improve? Sometimes they ignored him, but sometimes they answered, and those answers were gold. In 2 months, Ryan's income tripled. He wasn't rich. He still slept in his van some nights. But he no longer felt like a guy begging for business. He felt like a builder. And more importantly, he was no longer guessing. He was learning, one dirty paw at a time. By the time spring rolled in, Ryan had serviced over 100 dogs from the back of his van. Some appointments were clean and quick. Others were full-on wrestling matches with nervous Great Danes and snippy terriers. But with every visit, he refined the process. Every dog taught him something. Every client offered a new detail he could improve. Still, there were limits. Rainy days threw off everything. His generator broke twice, and more than once, a client canceled last minute because the idea of van grooming just didn't feel professional enough. Ryan knew the mobile model worked, but it wasn't scalable, not long-term. He was maxed out, booked 6 days a week, working out of parking lots and driveways. No backup if he got sick. No room to train someone else. He went back to his notebook and started mapping things out. Rent, utilities, equipment, insurance. He didn't have the savings for a fancy storefront, but he didn't need fancy. He needed functional. He circled 2 words on the page: lean launch. That night, he found an old warehouse unit listed for lease just outside town. Not pretty. No signage. The floor was cracked and the ceiling tiles sagged. But it had plumbing, 2 working outlets, and a roll-up door wide enough to walk a St. Bernard through. It was cheap because it was a mess, but it was his kind of mess. He negotiated the lease month to month. No long-term commitments. He borrowed paint supplies from a friend, traded free grooming for handyman work, and spent every evening fixing up the space. White walls, clean lighting, a single grooming table, a homemade sign out front, buddy wash, walk-ins welcome. The grand opening wasn't grand at all, just a handwritten chalkboard, a folding chair out front, and Buddy lying under the counter like he owned the place. But the first day, 4 clients showed up. One was a woman who'd followed his story on Facebook. Another was a former mobile customer who brought her neighbor along. The last 2 just saw the sign and figured it was worth a shot. By the end of the week, he'd booked out the following 2 Saturdays. Ryan still did mobile calls during the week to keep money coming in, but the shop became his base. It gave him space to breathe and space to train help. He reached out to Mason, a guy he'd worked with years ago at the grooming shop that shut down during COVID. Mason was working at a warehouse now, barely making rent. "You want to come back to dogs?" Ryan asked. Mason laughed. "Only if they don't talk back." A week later, he was in. Ryan trained him slowly, 1 dog at a time, 1 process at a time. They build everything with the same lean startup mindset. Test small, fix fast, repeat what works. They kept the services simple: basic groom, gentle groom, and senior care. No add-ons, no packages, no upselling, just clear, consistent results. Ryan tracked every metric: appointment times, return rates, client satisfaction. He created a calendar system on Google Sheets, used free CRM tools to send appointment reminders. Every tool was either free or scrappy, but it worked. Within 3 months, they needed a second table. By month 5, Ryan stopped doing mobile entirely. He didn't have to anymore. Word of mouth alone filled their weekly slots. What surprised him most wasn't the revenue. It was the loyalty. People didn't just come for a clean dog. They came because they trusted Ryan, because their dog wagged its tail walking through the door, because they knew what to expect and got it every time. Parents brought kids who'd ask, "Can we visit Buddy too?" The shop had become something more than a service. It was a community hub disguised as a dog spa. Ryan never forgot the van. He kept it parked behind the building, cleaned and repainted. Not to use, just to remember. That van taught him that you didn't need to wait for things to be perfect. You just had to start with what you had and keep learning. Every time a new client walked through the door and said, "So this is the famous Buddy Wash," Ryan smiled and thought, not famous, just consistent. The first Buddy Wash shop wasn't designed to be a blueprint, but it became one. Everything about it was simple: low overhead, tight operations, strong customer loyalty. Ryan didn't realize it at the time, but what he'd built wasn't just a business, it was a replicable model. A small, high-trust, high-efficiency service people actually wanted. By the end of year one, the numbers were clear. Revenue crossed 320, 0. Profit margins were tight, but real. Customer retention hovered above 70%. And most importantly, Ryan wasn't burnt out. He wasn't scrambling to survive. He was thinking ahead. That's when a longtime customer approached him with a question. "Have you ever thought about opening another one closer to Westerville?" Ryan hadn't. Not seriously. He'd just gotten this one running smoothly. But the demand was real. The wait list was now 2 weeks long. People were driving across town just for a standard wash. His calendar had no open slots for Saturday appointments for months. He pulled out his notebook again, just like he had in the van. He didn't plan a franchise. He didn't hire consultants. He just listed what made Buddy Wash work: limited services, repeatable processes, compassionate handling, clear pricing, and tech-light operations. If those 5 things could be protected, he could expand without losing what made it special. He scoped out a second location, this time in a strip mall just off a busy intersection. It wasn't fancy, but it had visibility, parking, and plumbing. That was enough. Instead of trying to staff it himself, Ryan brought in Mason as lead manager and trainer. They hired 2 apprentices from a local vocational program student studying animal care who needed hands-on hours. Ryan trained them personally for weeks, side by side, on every detail: how to hold the shears, how to read dog body language, how to speak calmly no matter how chaotic the moment felt. He paid them more than minimum wage. Always did. Because if they didn't feel valued, neither would the dogs or the customers. By month 3, the second shop was breaking even. By month 6, it was turning a profit. Ryan reinvested everything. He didn't upgrade his car, didn't take a vacation, didn't even raise his own salary that first year. Instead, he built a third Buddy Wash across town near, a cluster of apartment complexes filled with dog owners and no nearby grooming services. Each location followed the same model, same layout, same services, same appointment system, even the same lavender scent in the lobby. He avoided expansion debt by growing slower than most people advised. While others rushed to scale with investor cash, Ryan took a different route. Let each location pay for the next. Lean, simple, stress-tested. And it worked. By the end of year 3, Buddy Wash had 7 locations across central Ohio. Each was run by someone Ryan had trained directly. Every team member, whether manager or trainee, had started with a dog under their hands, not a clipboard. Annual revenue crossed $5.2 million. It didn't feel real sometimes, not to a guy who once counted quarters for gas money in the back of a van. But Ryan didn't lose himself in the numbers. Growth had never been the goal. What mattered most was quality consistency, trust, care. He didn't want to be the biggest. He wanted to be the most loved. People noticed. Local media ran a feature on Buddy Wash, the man who built a dog empire from a van. Clients started bringing treats not just for their dogs, but for the staff. One little girl brought in hand-drawn cards saying, "Thank you for making my puppy feel safe." Ryan hung them in the lobby. Behind the counter of every shop, he posted the same framed quote from The Lean Startup in plain black letters. "Start small, learn fast, build what matters." It was the compass he still followed. Because even now, after everything, he believed the secret wasn't in scaling faster, was in scaling smarter. And no matter how many shops opened, Ryan knew that success would always come down to the same things. One dog, One customer, one experience at a time. Arlie 12 now. Slower, stiffer, sleeping more than playing. One morning, Ryan found him curled up on the grooming mat, wheezing, his heartbeat faint. The vet said it was time. There are moments you don't prepare for, no matter how many spreadsheets you've filled or how many milestones you've hit. Saying goodbye to Buddy in that quiet exam room, his hand resting gently on the one soul who never asked anything of him, broke Ryan in a way no business failure ever could. He canceled appointments for the day, sat in the back of the original shop, in the same folding chair from their opening week, and cried until the sky went dark. For days afterward, he wondered if he could keep going. Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was the symbol of everything Ryan had built his life around: loyalty, second chances, quiet strength. But then something unexpected happened. Clients began showing up not for appointments, but to bring flowers, cards, stories. One man said, "When I was laid off, Buddy Wash was the only place I felt seen." A single mom said, "You gave my kid her first real job, and she loved every minute of it." Someone left a framed photo of their dog, freshly groomed, tail mid-wag, captioned, "Thank you, Buddy." The wall behind the counter filled with notes, paw prints, and memories. And Ryan remembered something he'd written in his notebook 3 years ago, back when he had nothing. "Build something that would matter even if I'm gone." That was the promise. Not to chase growth, but to build something rooted enough to hold others up when they're falling apart. So he came back, not louder, not stronger, but clearer. He didn't need to prove himself anymore. He just needed to keep showing up. 3 years after he'd first washed a dog out of the back of his van, Ryan Carter stood in the doorway of the original Buddy Wash location. It still smelled like lavender shampoo and wet fur. The floors had been polished since then. The walls now displayed framed customer thank you notes and snapshots of smiling dogs. But at its core, the place hadn't changed. It was still built on care. The business now spanned multiple cities. New locations were opening. A small operations team handled scheduling and payroll. Systems were in place. Buddy Wash had become a brand, but Ryan still thought of it as a promise. One dog at a time. One owner. One experience. People ask him often now, usually at events or meetups, "How'd you do it? What's your secret? What advice would you give to someone just starting?" He always gave the same answer: "I didn't wait until I was ready." Because the truth is, he never felt ready. Not when he taped the first flyer to a mailbox. Not when he opened that warehouse unit with a cracked ceiling. Not even when the 5th shop hit profitability. He was always learning, always adjusting, always doing the best he could with what he had. And what he had at the beginning was almost nothing. Just a van, a dog, and a skill no one thought twice about. He used to be embarrassed by that, the van life, the fact that his business started out of desperation, not inspiration. But not anymore. Now he knew desperation is inspiration if you're willing to move through it. And more than anything else, he wanted people to know that building something didn't require permission. It didn't require perfection. It required listening, not just to your customers, but to yourself. What do you care about? What do you notice that others ignore? For Ryan, it was dogs who flinched under loud dryers. Owners who felt judged when their pets came in a little too matted. The simple need for compassion in a process that most businesses treated as routine. He didn't invent grooming. He just slowed it down, made it human again. He kept a framed page from the lean startup on his desk, dog-eared and water-stained. It reminded him of where the shift began, when hustle turned into learning, when guessing turned into asking, when survival turned into strategy. Ryan knew not everyone wanted to run a business. But he also knew everyone, at some point, would face a blank page, a moment where the life they had planned falls apart. And the question isn't, how do I rebuild it the same? The real question is, what can I build from what's left? Sometimes, it's less than you hoped for. But sometimes, less is enough. Enough to get started, enough to build trust, enough to learn and iterate and serve the people right in front of you. He used to think building a business was about chasing big numbers. Now, he thought about the quiet things like the single mom who brought in her old rescue every 2 weeks without fail, or the teenager on the spectrum who found his first job at Buddy Wash and now trained new hires with more patience than Ryan ever could. It was never about dogs. It was about care. Care that turned into consistency. Consistency that turned into trust. And trust that, over time, built something too solid to ignore. Ryan still kept the van, parked behind the original shop, cleaned and locked, not as a trophy but as a reminder of how far someone can go when they stop waiting for a perfect plan, when they decide that today, right now, is good enough to begin. If someone ever asked him, really asked him, what would you say to the version of yourself in that parking lot 3 years ago? He'd smile gently and say, start ugly, start small, start anyway. Because no one builds greatness all at once. They build it the way dogs learn to trust, slowly, patiently, and with their whole heart. And that changes everything.